As the will was being read, my son couldn't contain himself and declared for everyone to hear, "If she gets anything, I'll give up my share." I held my silence, a gentle smile playing on my lips. He had no idea that the fortune totaled $11 million. "I'm truly delighted to have you here with us. Come along with me on this adventure until we reach the final page, and let me know the city you're connecting from so I can cherish the distance my story has covered." The lawyer, Mr. Patterson, paused, his eyes darting nervously between Wesley and me. The air grew heavy with a palpable tension, as if the world was holding its breath. The weight of their stares was unmistakable, from the smug satisfaction on my daughter-in-law's face to the understanding glances of my sister-in-law and the confusion mirrored in my grandchildren's faces. My hands trembled softly in my lap, but I held on to my composure, just as I had for the past 50 years. "Please continue, Mr. Patterson," I encouraged gently. Wesley chuckled lightly, leaning back in his chair with a relaxed demeanor. At 47, my son had taken on a remarkable likeness to his father Frank, standing tall and broad-shouldered, with that same assured set to his jaw. Frank's confidence blossomed from years of unwavering dedication and hard work, while Wesley's emerged from a place of entitlement. "Mom, let's be honest," Wesley said, his tone dripping with contempt. "My father built this business from the very beginning, pouring his heart and soul into every detail. You were simply along for the ride on this adventure." She nodded in agreement, her elegantly manicured hand resting protectively on Wesley's arm. Frank frequently asserted that the individuals who genuinely understand the complexities of business ought to be the ones in charge of decision-making. She noted, her eyes wandering off into the distance. I swallowed the familiar pain, the same heartache I had been grappling with for years. At 72, I had grown accustomed to being dismissed, overlooked, and treated as if my only role in our family was to bear Wesley and support Frank. They were unaware of the countless evenings I spent poring over contracts, while Frank succumbed to fatigue, the connections I nurtured through countless dinners, and the prudent financial decisions I guided Frank to make when his aspirations outpaced his discernment. Mr. Patterson paused, taking a moment to clear his throat, as if gathering his thoughts before speaking. "This is just a preliminary meeting," he softly reminded. "The official reading is set for next week, as soon as all the required paperwork is in order." What preparations should I make? Wesley was adamant. My father placed the business in my hands, ensuring that the house would be a sanctuary for my mother to cherish for the rest of her days. With the remaining assets shared among us, it's evident that this was his plan from the very beginning. As I met Mr. Patterson's gaze, the expression he wore urged me to subtly straighten my stance. In the tender moments we experienced during his final months, Frank and I frequently engaged in profound conversations as the unyielding hold of illness started to take its toll on him. In those quiet moments, when the heaviness of pain and medication eased his barriers, my husband shared a myriad of regrets, particularly about Wesley. I had surrendered to him far too frequently, Frank whispered one evening, his hand gripping mine with an unforeseen fervor. I thought I was showing my love, but instead, I unknowingly taught him to expect everything to come easily to him. He'll discover his path, I reassured him, even though, beneath the surface, I harbored doubts. Frank's eyes shone with a newfound clarity, unveiling a profound emotional landscape that was both touching and filled with promise. "No, Mabel, not unless there's a strong reason for him to act that way." In that moment, as I watched Wesley's sense of entitlement and his simmering anger, the significance of Frank's words unfolded before me. My son believed he deserved everything his father had built. Without needing to exert any effort himself, the estate conceals a depth of complexity that might not be obvious at first glance. "Mr. Wesley," Mr. Patterson noted with a hint of caution, "your father experienced significant changes during his final months." Wesley's head snapped up. "Changes? What changes?" I concentrated on my intertwined fingers, an unusual calm enveloping me. Frank had always kept the details of his plans close to his chest, but he had earnestly asked me to trust him just one last time. Just wait and see. Mabel, he had said, that familiar sparkle in his eye that had stolen my heart so many years ago. Ensure that you stand firm when the time comes. This is absurd, Wesley exclaimed, standing up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. I will stand up against whatever my father does, if necessary. Mom just doesn't seem to fit into the business world. In just a month, she would have methodically unraveled the entire company. Wesley, I spoke softly, my voice emerging at last after his sudden outburst. Your father founded Harrington Manufacturing, creating a legacy that has endured for over 45 years. Do you think he had a good reason for making that choice regarding it? My son looked at me with a mix of astonishment and confusion, as though I had just suggested something utterly absurd. He decided to place his trust in me, his sole offspring, the one who has been by his side for 20 years. Not to his partner, who finds it challenging to maneuver through a smartphone. The casual cruelty cut deep, but I held my ground with unwavering resolve. Behind Wesley's assured exterior, I caught a glimpse of something else in his gaze, an undercurrent of fear. He had been relying on this inheritance, maybe even more than I understood. As everyone exited the room, she lingered by my chair, bending down as if to wrap me in a warm embrace. Her voice slithered into my ear like a toxic whisper. Don't get any ideas. Mabel, Wesley is prepared to fight for what's rightfully his. I patted her hand gently. We all get what we deserve in the end, dear. When I was finally alone with Mr. Patterson, he looked at me with concerned eyes. Are you all right, Mrs. Harrington? I nodded, a strange lightness filling my chest. Frank knew exactly what he was doing, didn't he? Mr. Patterson's professional facade cracked into a small smile. Your husband was a very wise man, and he adored you more than you probably realize. As I gathered my purse to leave, I thought about the fortune that Wesley had no idea existed. The $11 million Frank had quietly amassed beyond the company's value, and what my husband had decided to do with it. Next week would change everything. And for the first time in decades, I found myself looking forward to the future. The week between meetings stretched endlessly. I spent most of it alone in the house that Frank and I had shared for 43 years, running my fingers along the familiar surfaces, remembering we'd bought this place when Wesley was 4, a modest 3-bedroom that seemed enormous after our starter apartment. Frank had just secured his first major contract, and I'd recently abandoned my teaching career to support his growing business. Temporary, he'd promised, as I packed away my education degree, just until things stabilize. But things never quite stabilized enough for me to return to teaching. Instead, I became Harrington Manufacturing's unseen foundation, managing our home, raising Wesley, hosting clients, reviewing contracts after hours, all while Frank became the company's public face. I paused at the mantel, picking up a photo from Wesley's college graduation. Frank stood proudly beside him, both in matching suits, their posture identically confident. I stood slightly apart, smiling, but somehow separate. Even then, I could see the pattern forming, though I'd been powerless to stop it. The doorbell rang, startling me from my memories. Barbara stood on the porch, clutching a casserole dish. Thought you might need some company, my sister-in-law said, brushing past me into the kitchen. Unlike Frank, who'd been warm and gregarious, Barbara had always been brutally direct. You look terrible, Mabel. I touched my uncombed hair, self-consciously. I haven't been sleeping well. Barbara set down her dish and faced me squarely. Wesley's been calling me, says Frank. Might have changed the will. Might have left you more than your fair share. She made air quotes around the last words. The reading isn't until tomorrow. I said carefully, cut the act. Mabel, did Frank leave you the company? I met her gaze steadily. Frank and I didn't discuss the details of his will. Barbara snorted. Right? 50 years together. And he never mentioned his plans for the multi-million-dollar company you helped him build. Frank made his own decisions. She studied me for a long moment. You know, I never understood you. You let Frank and Wesley walk all over you for decades. Even now, you're defending them. I turned away, busying myself with making tea. You didn't live my life. Barbara, no, thank God, she muttered. I would have left Frank the first time he took credit for my work, which, from what I observed, was sometime around 1980. The kettle whistled, saving me from responding. As I poured hot water into mugs, Barbara continued, her voice softening slightly. Do you remember when Wesley was about 12 and Frank got him that ridiculous racing bike? I nodded, setting a mug in front of her. Wesley had begged for that bike for months. Despite my concerns, it was too advanced for him. You told Frank it was dangerous. Frank bought it anyway. 3 weeks later, Wesley broke his arm. That was a long time ago, I murmured. My point is, you were right. You were always right, Mabel, about Wesley. Especially, you saw what Frank was creating with his indulgence. A entitled, spoiled man who never had to earn anything. I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. What do you want me to say? Barbara, that I failed as a mother, that I should have put my foot down more. Barbara reached across the table and gripped my hand, a rare gesture of affection from her. I want you to stop blaming yourself for Wesley's character. Frank made him what he is. Maybe you could have fought harder. But Frank would have just gone behind your back anyway. Tears pricked at my eyes. I did try. You know, when Wesley was in college, he got into trouble, drinking, failing classes. I wanted consequences. Frank just threw money at the problem, moved him to a different school. I remember, Barbara said grimly. And then Frank gave him a vice presidency straight out of college, despite him having 0 qualifications. I sighed, memories flooding back. Wesley's first year at the company. He lost a major client with his arrogance. Frank covered for him, told everyone it was a strategic decision. And now, Wesley thinks he's entitled to run the company. Barbara concluded, he's worked there for 20 years. I pointed out, worked. Barbara scoffed. He shows up late, leaves early, takes credit for his team's ideas, and spends more time on the golf course than in his office. Meanwhile, he and Diane are spending money like water. The new vacation house, the boat, private schools for the kids. I looked up sharply. How bad is it? Barbara hesitated. There are rumors. Mabel, Wesley's been leveraging his expected inheritance. They're in debt up to their eyeballs. This wasn't entirely surprising. Wesley and Diane had always lived beyond their means. And recently, they'd been pressing Frank to formalize the succession plan, to put in writing what Wesley assumed was his birthright. Did Frank know? I asked quietly. Barbara nodded. Jim in accounting showed him some concerning transactions about 6 months ago. Wesley had been giving himself unauthorized bonuses, billing personal expenses to the company 6 months ago, right around when Frank had started having those serious private conversations with me and Mr. Patterson. The timing suddenly made sense. After Barbara left, I went to Frank's study, a room I'd barely entered since his death. His presence was strongest here. In the leather chair, worn to the shape of his body, the faint smell of his cologne still lingering. I ran my hand along his desk, remembering how many nights I'd brought him coffee as he worked late, how many times I'd given him my thoughts on a contract or a negotiation strategy. In the bottom drawer, I found a small leather journal I'd never seen before. Inside, in Frank's precise handwriting, was a letter addressed to me, my dearest Mabel. It began, if you're reading this, I've already gone, and you're wondering if you've spent your life being a doormat. The answer is yes and no. Yes, I took advantage of your generosity and brilliance too many times to count. No, it wasn't your fault. It was mine, for being too proud to publicly acknowledge how much I needed you. The letter continued for pages. Frank's confession of how he'd realized too late the monster of entitlement he'd created in Wesley. How he'd watched our son manipulate and charm his way through life without developing any real substance. I can't undo the past. The letter concluded, but I can try to shape the future. Forgive me for the pain that's coming, but trust that it's necessary. Wesley needs to learn what you and I never taught him, that nothing valuable comes without earning. Yet, I'm trusting you to be stronger than I ever was. All my love, Frank. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Tomorrow, I would discover exactly what Frank had planned and why Wesley was so afraid. The morning before the final will reading, I decided to visit my grandchildren. Wesley and Diane had always controlled my access to them, scheduling our interactions with the precision of international diplomats arranging peace talks. But today, I didn't call ahead. I simply drove to their sprawling, Tudor-style home and rang the doorbell. The housekeeper, Maria, answered, her eyes widening at the sight of me. "Mrs. Harrington, I didn't know you were coming today. Is Diane home?" I asked, already knowing she would be at her weekly tennis lesson. "No, ma'am, just the children. They're finishing breakfast." I smiled warmly. "Perfect. I thought I'd surprise them." Maria hesitated, clearly uncertain whether to admit me without Diane's permission. But her respect for me as the family matriarch won out. She stepped aside. Emma and Jacob, 12 and 10, were sitting at the kitchen island, still in their pajamas, despite it being nearly 10 o'clock. They looked up in surprise as I entered. "Grandma," Emma said, her voice uncertain. "Mom didn't say you were coming. It's a surprise visit," I explained, setting my purse down. "I missed you both." Jacob, always the more affectionate of the two, slid off his stool and gave me a quick hug before retreating. Emma stayed where she was, watching me warily. "Are your parents around?" I asked casually, though I already knew the answer. "Dad's at work," Jacob said. "Mom's at tennis." I nodded, taking a seat at the island. "How's school going?" Emma shrugged. "Fine. Did you finish that science project you were working on? The one about ecosystems?" Emma's eyes widened slightly. "You remember that?" "Of course I do," I said, gently. "I remember everything you tell me." A flash of confusion crossed her face. "But Mom said you don't really listen to us, that you're too distracted." My heart contracted painfully, but I kept my expression neutral. "What else does your mom say about me?" The children exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "You can tell me," I assured them. "I won't be upset." Jacob bit his lip. "She says you never really wanted Dad to be born, that you resented having to give up your job to raise him." The cruelty of the lie stole my breath for a moment. I had adored Wesley from the moment he was placed in my arms. Yes, I'd mourned my teaching career, but I'd never once regretted my son. "And," Emma added hesitantly, "she says you tried to convince Grandpa Frank not to let Dad work at the company because you were jealous of him." I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. "Do you believe that?" Both children looked down at their cereal bowls. "It's okay," I said softly. "These are complicated grown-up issues, but I want you to know that I have always loved your father very much, and I love both of you more than anything." I spent the next hour really talking with my grandchildren. Perhaps, for the first time, without Diane's hovering presence, they gradually relaxed, sharing stories about school and friends. I realized how little I actually knew about their lives, how successfully Diane had isolated them from me. As I was preparing to leave, not wanting to be there when Diane returned, Emma suddenly asked, "Grandma, are you and Dad fighting about Grandpa's money?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Your grandfather worked very hard all his life. He wanted to make sure his money was used wisely. Dad says you're trying to take what belongs to him," Jacob said bluntly. A wave of sadness washed over me. "Is that what he told you?" Emma nodded solemnly. "He was really upset. He said you never supported him like Grandpa did." I knelt down to their level, looking into their young, troubled faces. Sometimes adults disagree about important things, but that doesn't change how much we all love you. No matter what happens with Grandpa's will, you will always be my precious grandchildren. On the drive home, I could barely see through my tears. Diane hadn't just poisoned my relationship with my grandchildren. She'd rewritten our entire family history. In her version, I was the villain, the jealous mother who resented her own son's success. I pulled over, unable to continue driving. The pain was too sharp, too fresh. All these years, I'd believed that Wesley's dismissive attitude toward me was simply the result of Frank's indulgence of masculine pride. I never imagined he harbored such deep resentment that he believed I had tried to hold him back. When I finally arrived home, a familiar car was parked in my driveway. Thomas Reed, Frank's oldest friend and the company's financial controller, was waiting on my porch. "Thomas," I greeted him, wiping away the last traces of tears. "This is unexpected." His weathered face was grave. "We need to talk, Mabel, about Wesley." Inside, Thomas declined coffee. Getting straight to the point, "Wesley's been borrowing against his inheritance. Heavily." I nodded. "Barbara mentioned He and Diane have financial problems. It's worse than that, Thomas said grimly. He's leveraged everything on a real estate development in Colorado, luxury ski condos. The project is failing spectacularly. How bad? He's nearly $2 million in debt with nothing to show for it, except half-built structures that won't pass code inspection. I sank into a chair. Did Frank know? Thomas nodded. Frank discovered it about 7 months ago. Wesley had been embezzling from the company to cover his personal debts. Embezzling. The word felt like a physical blow. Are you certain? I have the documentation. Frank confronted him privately. They worked out a repayment plan to avoid criminal charges. Frank was devastated. 7 months ago, when Frank's cancer had suddenly seemed to accelerate, when he'd started having those intense, private conversations with me and Mr. Patterson, Wesley's counting on his inheritance to bail him out. Thomas continued, if he doesn't get what he's expecting. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Wesley wouldn't just lose face. He could lose everything. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Thomas's expression softened. Because Frank asked me to, after the will reading. He wanted you to understand what you're dealing with. Wesley isn't just entitled. Mabel, he's desperate. After Thomas left, I sat alone in my quiet living room. The weight of this new knowledge pressing down on me. My son, who had everything handed to him his entire life, had still wanted more. He'd stolen from his father, lied to his family, and now expected his inheritance to save him from the consequences of his actions. And tomorrow, at the will reading, he would discover whether Frank had thrown him a lifeline or cut him loose to finally sink or swim on his own. The morning of the final will, reading dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully in a navy suit that Frank had always liked, my one concession to sentimentality. As I fastened my pearl earrings, Frank's gift, on our 40th anniversary, the doorbell rang. Mr. Patterson stood on my porch, his expression grave. Mrs. Harrington, I thought we might ride together. I raised an eyebrow. The reading isn't for 2 hours. I know. I thought you might appreciate some preparation. I invited him in, a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. Is something wrong? Once, seated in my living room, Mr. Patterson removed a thick folder from his briefcase. Before we join the others, I need to explain Frank's plan in detail. He was very specific about the timing. I'm listening, I said, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. Frank came to me 8 months ago, shortly after his diagnosis. He was concerned about Wesley's fiscal responsibility. I nodded. I've since learned about the embezzlement. Mr. Patterson looked relieved. Good. That makes this easier. Frank was deeply troubled by Wesley's actions, not just the legal implications, but what they revealed about his character. He opened the folder, revealing a series of documents. Frank restructured his estate with 2 primary goals: protecting the company's future and providing you with security and control. Control, I repeated, the word unfamiliar in relation to my role in the family. Yes, Frank recognized belatedly that you were always the more prudent decision-maker. He came to believe that Wesley's sense of entitlement stemmed from Frank's own actions, always giving Wesley what he wanted, never requiring him to earn his place. I felt a strange sense of validation, hearing Frank's thoughts echoed by Mr. Patterson. For decades, I'd voiced these same concerns, only to be dismissed as overprotective or lacking business acumen. The will creates a trust. Mr. Patterson continued. All of Frank's assets, the company, the properties, the investments, will be held in this trust. You, Mabel, are the primary trustee. I stared at him. Me, not Wesley, not Wesley. He confirmed. Frank believed you would make decisions based on what's best for the family's long-term security, not just immediate gratification. My mind raced, trying to process this reversal of the roles I'd inhabited for 50 years. Wesley will contest it, I said finally. Frank anticipated that. Mr. Patterson's expression was grim, which is why he included some unusual provisions. He pulled out another document, this one marked with several highlighted sections. If Wesley contests the will, he forfeits everything, no exceptions. Everything. My voice was barely audible. Everything. His position at the company, his inheritance, even the house they live in, which is technically owned by Harrington Manufacturing. I stood up, suddenly needing to move. This seems extreme. Frank was protecting the company. And you, Mr. Patterson said, he knew Wesley would try to bully you into giving him control. This was his way of ensuring that couldn't happen. I paced to the window, gazing out at the garden. Frank and I had tended together for decades. What about my grandchildren? Emma and Jacob shouldn't suffer for their father's mistakes. Frank thought of that too. Mr. Patterson pulled out yet another document. The trust includes provisions for their education and future security, regardless of Wesley's actions. Those funds cannot be accessed by Wesley or Diane under any circumstances. Relief flooded through me. Whatever happened, my grandchildren would be protected. There's more, Mr. Patterson said. About the 11 million. I turned back to face him. Yes, it's separate from the company assets. It's money Frank set aside over the years. Investments that performed exceptionally well. Wesley doesn't know this money exists. I gathered that. I said. Frank mentioned it to me only once in passing. This money is yours outright, Mr. Patterson explained. No trust, no conditions. Frank wanted you to have resources that were completely independent of the company and Wesley. I sank back into my chair, overwhelmed. Why didn't Frank tell me any of this before he died? Mr. Patterson's expression softened. He said you might have tried to talk him out of it, that you'd spent a lifetime making excuses for Wesley, trying to keep the peace. That stung, partly because it was true. I had spent decades smoothing things over, making excuses, trying to protect the fragile peace of our family. There's a letter, Mr. Patterson added, pulling a sealed envelope from the folder. Frank asked me to give this to you before the reading. My name was written on the front in Frank's bold, decisive handwriting. I took it with trembling fingers, but didn't open it. Some things were too private to share, even with Mr. Patterson. What do you think Wesley will do? I asked instead. He'll be angry, Mr. Patterson said bluntly, possibly threatening. Almost certainly, he'll try to intimidate you into changing the terms. And if that doesn't work, then he'll try to contest it. Despite the forfeiture clause, he'll claim you manipulated Frank during his illness, that Frank wasn't of sound mind. I felt a flare of indignation. Frank was sharp until the very end. We have extensive documentation of his mental competence, Mr. Patterson assured me. Multiple witnesses, medical evaluations. Wesley won't win a contest, but he could drag it out, make things unpleasant. I thought of my grandchildren, of the lies Diane had already told them. How much worse would it get if Wesley declared open war? What would you advise? I asked. Mr. Patterson considered the question carefully. Frank believed Wesley needed to face real consequences for once in his life, that without that, he'd never grow into the man he could be. And you? I think Frank was right, he said simply, but I also think you need to prepare yourself for the fallout. Wesley won't go quietly. I glanced at the clock. We had an hour before we needed to leave for the reading. An hour for me to decide whether I would follow through with Frank's plan or find some compromise to keep the peace as I'd done my entire life. I'd like a few minutes alone, if you don't mind, I said. After Mr. Patterson stepped outside, I opened Frank's letter with unsteady hands, his familiar handwriting blurred as tears filled my eyes. My dearest Mabel, it began. By now, Patterson has explained everything. You're probably wondering if I've lost my mind, putting you in this position. The truth is, I finally found it. For 50 years, you've been the backbone of this family. The quiet strength I relied on, but rarely acknowledged. Publicly, I took advantage of your generosity, your willingness to step back and let me shine. I failed Wesley even more profoundly. I gave him everything except what he truly needed. Boundaries, consequences, the chance to earn his own success. Now, he's a man who takes what he wants without thought for others, who believes he's entitled to the fruits of other people's labor. I can't undo the past, but I can try to shape the future. Wesley needs to learn what I never taught him, and you need to claim the authority you've earned through a lifetime of wisdom and sacrifice. It won't be easy. He'll fight, he'll rage, he'll try every manipulation he's ever learned. But Mabel, my love, you are stronger than you know. You've always been the true power in our family. It's time for everyone else to recognize it too. All my love, now and always. Frank. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it to my heart. Then I dried my tears, reapplied my lipstick, and went to tell Mr. Patterson I was ready. Frank was right. It was time to stop making excuses. Time to stop smoothing things over. For Wesley's sake, as much as my own, it was time to stand firm. The conference room at Patterson and Associates was filled to capacity. Wesley and Diane sat directly across from me, both dressed impeccably. Wesley in a charcoal suit that matched his stormy expression. Diane in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Barbara sat beside me, her presence a silent show of support. Various extended family members and company executives lined the walls, their curious gazes darting between Wesley and me. Wesley leaned across the table. "You look pleased with yourself." "Mom," he said quietly, his voice pitched so only I could hear. "Did you and Dad cook something up during his last days?" I met his gaze steadily. "Your father was of sound mind until the end." Wesley, his eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." Mr. Patterson entered the room, accompanied by 2 associates carrying stacks of documents. He nodded solemnly to the assembled group. "Thank you all for coming. We're here for the formal reading of Franklin Harrington's last will and testament. Before we begin, I want to clarify that Mr. Harrington revised his will 7 months ago with multiple witnesses present, including his physician, who attested to his mental competence." Wesley shifted in his chair, the first flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Mr. Patterson adjusted his glasses and began reading the formal legal preamble. I barely heard the words, focusing instead on my son's face. Despite everything I'd learned, despite his cruelty and poor choices, my heart ached for what was coming. No mother wants to see her child suffer, even when that suffering is necessary. Now, to the disposition of assets. Mr. Patterson said, his voice cutting through my thoughts. Franklin Harrington established the Harrington Family Trust, into which all company assets, properties, and investments have been placed. Wesley nodded impatiently. This much he had expected. The trustee of this trust, with full authority over all business decisions, distributions, and management, is Mabel Eleanor Harrington. A shocked murmur rippled through the room. Wesley's face drained of color. "That's impossible," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Mr. Patterson said firmly. "Mrs. Harrington has sole authority as trustee." Diane gripped Wesley's arm. "What about Wesley? He's the only child, the heir." "Wesley James Harrington," Mr. Patterson continued, "will retain his position as Vice President of Operations, reporting directly to the Board of Directors, which will be chaired by Mrs. Harrington." Wesley's face had transformed from shock to fury. "This is ridiculous. My mother knows nothing about running a company. Dad built that business. I worked alongside him for 20 years. And now you're telling me she's in charge. Your father's decision was quite clear." Mr. Patterson said calmly. "My father was dying." Wesley snapped. He wasn't thinking clearly. Mom obviously manipulated him when he was vulnerable. I flinched at the accusation, but kept my composure. "Wesley, please." "No." He slammed his hand on the table. "I will not let you steal what's rightfully mine. I'll contest this. I'll fight it with everything I have." Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. "Before you make that decision, Mr. Harrington, you should be aware of the contest clause." "The what?" Wesley demanded. "If any beneficiary contests this will or attempts to interfere with the administration of the trust, they forfeit all benefits, completely and irrevocably." Wesley laughed incredulously. "You're bluffing?" Mr. Patterson silently passed him the relevant document. I watched as Wesley scanned it, his expression shifting from disbelief to horror. "This is insane," he whispered. "He's disinheriting me if I object to this. This travesty." "Not disinheriting," Mr. Patterson corrected. "The trust provides for your continued employment and a generous annual distribution, provided you fulfill your professional obligations satisfactorily. But yes, if you contest the will, you forfeit everything, including your position at the E.U. company." Wesley turned to me, his eyes blazing. "You did this? You turned him against me." I shook my head sadly. "No, Wesley, your actions did that." Confusion flickered across his face. Your father knew about the embezzlement, I said quietly. He knew about the failed real estate venture, the $2 million in debt, all of it. Wesley paled further, his gaze darting around the room. Some of the executive shifted uncomfortably, clearly hearing this information for the first time. That's a lie, he hissed. Thomas Reed provided him with the documentation. I continued, my voice steady despite my breaking heart. Your father protected you from criminal charges, but he couldn't ignore what it revealed about your character. Diane was looking at Wesley with growing alarm. What is she talking about? What embezzlement? Wesley ignored her, focusing his rage on me. You had no right to discuss my personal business in front of everyone. These are the people whose jobs you put at risk, I replied. The company that's been supporting your lifestyle could have faced serious repercussions from your actions. Enough. Wesley stood abruptly. I won't sit here and be lectured by a woman who's never worked a day in her life. Dad built that company. I helped it grow. You have no right to any of it. Mr. Patterson interjected. There's more to the will that you need to hear. Mr. Harrington. Wesley waved dismissively. I don't care. This is going to court. Mom can enjoy her little power trip for now, but it won't last. As he turned to leave, Mr. Patterson's next words stopped him cold. In addition to the company assets, Franklin Harrington had personal investments valued at approximately $11 million. Wesley froze, turning slowly back to the table. What did you say? $11 million in personal investments, separate from the company. Mr. Patterson repeated. Accumulated over the past 30 years. Wesley sank back into his chair, his expression unreadable. And I suppose that goes into this trust too. No, Mr. Patterson said simply. That amount is bequeathed directly to Mrs. Harrington, with no restrictions or conditions. The room fell completely silent. Wesley stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. $11 million, he said flatly. Dad left you $11 million outright. I nodded, maintaining my composure, even as my heart raced. He did. Wesley laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. All these years, you played the humble housewife, the supportive spouse who sacrificed everything for Dad's career, and all along, you were just waiting to take control. That's not true, I said quietly. I never wanted this. Wesley, I only wanted our family to be whole. Our family. He spat. There is no family anymore. You've seen to that. Diane, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Wesley, don't be hasty. We need to think about this. He rounded on her. Think about what? How my mother has stolen my birthright. Think about our options, she said tensely, her eyes darting to the watching crowd. This isn't the place for this discussion. Wesley ignored her, focusing his rage on me. I'll fight this. I don't care what that contest clause says. No court will uphold this. This theft. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. The trust also includes provisions for Emma and Jacob's education and future security. Those funds cannot be accessed by anyone but them, regardless of any contests to the will. Wesley's face contorted with fury. So you're bribing my children now, trying to turn them against me too? No, I said firmly. Your father and I wanted to ensure their future, no matter what. Their future is my responsibility, not yours. Wesley snapped. You think you can buy their loyalty with trust funds? I met his gaze steadily. This isn't about loyalty, Wesley. It's about security. It's about making sure that your children don't suffer for any financial difficulties you might face. The implication hung in the air between us. Wesley knew I knew exactly how precarious his finances were, how close he was to losing everything. This meeting is over, he said finally, standing again. Come on, Diane, we're leaving. As they stormed out, the room erupted in murmurs. I sat perfectly still. Frank's letter, a reassuring weight in my pocket. The hardest part was done. Now came the aftermath. 3 months passed slowly. The initial shock of the will reading had rippled through our family, and the company, like a stone thrown into still water, creating waves that continued to spread outward. Wesley had consulted 5 different attorneys, all of whom told him the same thing. The will was ironclad. Frank had been methodical in documenting his mental competence, his reasons for the unusual arrangement, and Wesley's financial misdeeds, any contest would not only fail, but would trigger the forfeiture clause, leaving Wesley with nothing. I spent those months learning about the company I now oversaw. Thomas Reed became my closest advisor, patiently explaining the business Frank and I had built together, but that I had always viewed from the sidelines. To my surprise, much of it came naturally to me. Years of listening to Frank's dinner table conversations, reviewing contracts late at night, and offering quiet suggestions had given me a foundation I hadn't realized I possessed. The company, employees adapted to my leadership with varying degrees of acceptance. Some were openly skeptical, others cautiously supportive. I made no dramatic changes, focusing instead on steady, thoughtful management. Exactly what Frank would have wanted. Wesley had been conspicuously absent from both the office and family gatherings. According to Barbara, who somehow always knew everything, he and Diane were reassessing their options, which I suspected meant they were desperately trying to figure out how to manage their crushing debt without the windfall they'd been counting on. I hadn't seen my grandchildren since that day in their kitchen. The silence from them was the most painful part of this entire ordeal. On a crisp autumn morning, I was reviewing quarterly reports in Frank's old home office, my office now, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting visitors. Opening the front door, I found Wesley standing on the porch, alone. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and a humility in his posture that I'd never seen before. "Wesley," I said, surprise making my voice catch. "I wasn't expecting you. Can I come in?" he asked, his tone lacking its usual confidence. I stepped aside, motioning him into the living room. He sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, declining my offer of coffee. "How are you?" I asked when the silence stretched too long. He laughed hollowly. "How do you think? My life is falling apart." I waited, sensing he hadn't come just to tell me that. "We lost the house," he said finally. "The bank foreclosed last week." Though I'd been expecting this news, hearing it still hurt. "I'm sorry, Wesley." "Are you?" he asked, but without the venom I'd expected. "It's what Dad wanted, isn't it? For me to lose everything." I shook my head. "Your father wanted you to understand the value of what you had. He wanted you to become the man he knew you could be." Wesley stared at his hands. "We're staying with Diane's sister for now. It's humbling, to say the least." "The children?" I asked, trying to keep the eagerness from my voice. "They're confused, angry. They don't understand why we had to leave our house, why they had to change. Schools." Guilt twisted in my stomach. "Wesley, I never wanted them to suffer." "I know," he said softly, catching me off guard. "She shared with me the details of your visit and what the children mentioned you said to them." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, uncertain of what lay ahead. "You didn't bring me down," he continued. "You had the opportunity, yet you chose not to take it." Despite all the words I had shared about him, I found myself leaning over the coffee table, cautiously, resting my hand on his. "You are my child, regardless of the circumstances. That remains constant." Wesley's eyes brimmed with tears, a sight I hadn't witnessed since his childhood. "I feel like I've tangled everything up beyond repair. My mother, the business, my relationship, the safety of my kids. It's never too late to mend what has been broken," I said softly. He glanced up with sudden intensity. "Is that the reason you believe I'm present? To plead for financial assistance?" "No," I spoke truthfully. "I believe you've come here because you are my child, and you are suffering." Wesley appeared to lose his resolve, the remnants of his protective fury fading away. "She left," he stated suddenly. "She's taking the step to end her marriage," expressing that she never anticipated facing such financial devastation. Despite all that had transpired, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of compassion for Wesley. "I'm truly sorry to hear that." "Are you really?" he inquired once more, and this time his voice carried a sincere sense of curiosity. "After the way she treated you, how did she turn the kids against you?" "I empathize with your suffering," I expressed, "and for the implications this holds for Emma and Jacob." Wesley nodded thoughtfully. "People have been inquiring about you, particularly after Diane's departure. They are eager to uncover the truth behind her words." Hope danced in my heart. "So, what did you share with them?" "The truth," he stated plainly, "is that their grandmother is a wonderful person who cares for them deeply. As I have been, it's unjust to you. Emotion welled up within me. I would love the opportunity to see them, if at all possible. That's one of the reasons I'm here, Wesley confessed. They are in desperate need of stability at this moment. Individuals they can rely on. The silent plea lingered in the air between us. I assured him that they would always be welcome here. And so are you, Wesley. He nodded, his gaze falling to the ground. A heavy silence lingering between them. I'm uncertain about what comes next. Mom, I feel like I've lost nearly everything. My marriage, my home, and likely my job as well. Once the board discovers the extent of my mismanagement in the department, I weighed my next words with great thoughtfulness. Your father entrusted the company to me, believing in my ability to make the right decisions. If I determine that you are worthy of a genuine opportunity, would you be prepared to work for it? Will you genuinely deserve it this time? Wesley glanced upward, a brief shadow of his former defensiveness passing over his features. What could that imply? It signifies a fresh beginning. I stated with conviction, a diminished role, decreased compensation, and consistent supervision of your tasks. It signifies demonstrating your worth, not merely as Frank Harrington's son, but as an individual who contributes meaningfully to the organization. He remained silent for what felt like an eternity. And if I choose not to, then that's your decision. I stated calmly, the trust guarantees that Emma and Jacob will always be looked after. Regardless of the circumstances, you'll find a way to cope, but the way of life you've come to know will slip through your fingers. Wesley stood up and walked to the window, his gaze wandering over the garden that had served as the setting for his youthful escapades. Dad really seemed to have given this a great deal of consideration, didn't he? Absolutely. I can verify that he did. He had a profound affection for you, Wesley, one that compelled him to give you what you genuinely required, instead of just what you longed for. Wesley turned to me once more, his face reflecting a profound vulnerability that I hadn't seen since he was a child. And how about you, Mom? After everything that has happened, how can you still manage to extend your hand in support? I rose and stepped over to join him by the window. As your mother, I firmly believe that change can happen when the situation calls for it. Could it truly be feasible for someone like me, who frequently focuses solely on their own needs? He asked, his tone gentle and uncertain. Especially you, I murmured, gently caressing his cheek with my fingertips. Because beneath it all, you're still that boy who cried for the loss of his cherished goldfish. Who was responsible for providing the allowance to a man without a home at the tender age of 10, who held your newborn daughter with a gentleness that suggested she was as delicate as glass. Wesley's face glistened with the traces of his sorrow. I sense that I don't deserve another chance. I suppose that may not be true, I admitted. Nonetheless, one will be coming your way. The way you decide to approach it is completely up to you. 2 weeks later, Wesley found himself comfortably settled in the guest house. With Emma and Jacob by his side, he embarked on a new chapter in the purchasing department, a significant departure from his former position as vice president. This opportunity allowed him to grasp the essence of the business from the ground up, something he should have done long ago. The transition proved to be quite difficult. There were instances when Wesley's former sense of entitlement reemerged, making him uneasy at the idea of accepting guidance from those he had previously viewed as inferior. Slowly but surely, he began to change. The genuine joy flourished with my grandchildren nearby. Emma and Jacob shared their afternoons with me after school, gradually peeling back the layers of the tangled narrative that had ensnared us. We baked cookies, tended to the flowers in the garden, and shared heartfelt conversations about their lives, their feelings, their worries, and the future that awaits. Grandma, Emma asked one evening as we prepared dinner together, "Are you and Dad going to be okay now?" I looked out the window, watching Wesley help Jacob with his science project, his demeanor concentrated and calm, in a way I had rarely seen before. I promised her that everything would turn out fine, And for the first time in a long while, I truly believed it. Frank had been right all along. Sometimes, love compels us to set difficult boundaries, even when it seems to break our hearts to do so. Wesley was finally becoming the man he was destined to be, embracing responsibility, demonstrating thoughtfulness, and forging his own path in the world, rather than passively waiting for it to be handed to him. At 72, I discovered a resilience within myself that had always been there, waiting to be embraced. With my support, the organization thrived. My family was healing, and finally, I had found my voice. After so many years of silence, Frank's last gift transcended just financial backing or business prospects. It was a chance for all of us to uncover our authentic selves, free from the limitations that had held us captive for far too long. Within the stillness of his grand design rested our redemption, Wesley's, mine, and even Frank's, a legacy that possessed a significance far surpassing $11 million. Now I find myself pondering about you, the one who has listened to my story. What steps would you consider if you found yourself in my situation? Have you ever gone through something like this? We'd love to hear your insights in the comments below. In the meantime, I'm sharing 2 other captivating tales on the final screen that our channel holds dear, and they are bound to surprise you. We truly appreciate your continued presence with us on this journey.